Hi, this is Ryan Brooks, Sprint 3 for Spring 2023 of CEN 3031 for project group 27 BizZen. Uh, so this is the first sprint that I've had to fully develop everything on the back end as a single dev. Our last sprint, my partner Angelina left at the last minute, and so this sprint, what I tried to do, there was a lot of difficulties with that we were running into just with the general structure of the code. And so I took it upon myself to implement some, or really a generic interface for our database models. I found that this was the most likely, the easiest way to approach the issues that I was running into with just how slow it was to implement new database objects and methods. Since they all implement the same, 4 or 5 methods, I wanted to just create this generic and also have a equals function that I could use for testing. This compares the objects and returns whether or not all of their fields are equal. And then, obviously each one has a create, read, update, delete, basic CRUD a method, and then a get ID. And this came into effect with some of our functions, just having to have IDs passed to it. That change definitely took up a lot of time this sprint. I did manage to implement 3 new objects. I implemented the office model, the service model, and service offering model. Those were kind of like the most obvious next steps for the front end because uh, part of the basic functionality is just being able to create appointments and services in the front end as a business so that users can make appointments with them. The other big change this sprint was I wanted to be able to quickly load records into the database and be able to test front end functionality using those data loads. And so I used a site called Macaru to create some schemas for all of our existing objects and downloaded sample records that were created just with dummy data so that we can easily access those. For the purposes of testing, all of the IDs that start with 999 are the sample loads that I'm doing from Macaru data. Everything that is done through a Thunder client load is, and Thunder client is what we're using to test our handler functions, is prefaced with 666, and then everything that is loaded via a actual test function is prefaced with 888, and that just kind of gives us a way to differentiate them easily without also cluttering kind of like basic IDs at the bottom, just being able to easily reference. I know that there's 500 records created for each of these objects, and so we know it's going to be 999-001 through 999-500. So yeah, just went through the gamut of just automating that piece so that the front end could test and so that I could also test various validation logic and routes. And so, yeah, so I can give you a demonstration. So unfortunately, I'm not sure what change recently broke the tests package. So right now I have a lot of placeholder tests for all the objects that we'll be creating in the near future. And I have the existing tests from Sprint 2 and a couple more that I created. But yeah, as of right now, because of everything that I was trying to do, just organizing the code and making sure that I could be effective moving forward in the next couple of sprints, my main focus was just on refactoring the code to use those generics and then being able to load the sample data. So I'll go ahead and execute the server now so you can see up and running. And so it's going to initialize everything. It tells me that 500 records were created for each of these object types using that sample data file that I pointed to earlier. And I also added some additional debugging features. If you have debug enabled in the config file, it basically shoots out a lot more logging, which has been really nice for troubleshooting issues and figuring out exactly how Gorm is working in the background. But yeah, so those 500 records were created. So if I go in to the database, I can actually see these were all created. You can see this is the time they were created at, and all of the various fields. So that's for users, the same for businesses, and same thing for services. The other unfortunate circumstance for this sprint was I did run into an issue with Thunder Client. I didn't realize that there wasn't a place in the VS Workspace file for the project directory where this was being saved. And so I actually lost the Thunder Client test that I originally defined for Sprint 2. And there wasn't a way for me to get those back. So I did figure out the issue and updated the config, but because of that, it just, I only was able to re-implement the test for business. And so yeah, we'll go ahead and run those just so that you can see. And so, yeah, as of right now, everything is passing for the most part. I think these are just some additional bugs that I need to iron out. So yeah, it's just some basic data entry issues that are causing these tests to fail. It's not actually anything going wrong with the code itself. It's just something with the ID. Yeah. So I need to troubleshoot those two, but for the most part, these are all passing. And again, this is just testing the actual handler functions. I found that it's easiest to use a tool like Thunder Client or Postman to just do curl requests to actually hit the API server like a front end client would, so that I could test those. It was just easier than doing mocks for the actual tests. And then to actually test the models, what I did was started to create some generic cases, some standard ones. I'm also going to add just various corner cases, missing required fields, invalid field values, just so that I can test that the appropriate errors are being thrown. One of the struggles that I was running into this sprint is I didn't get a lot of feedback from the front end crew, and they weren't actively committing. I think they might have been working on things in the background, but just not pushing that to the actual GitHub repo. So I couldn't really see their progress or really interact with what it was that they were doing, which is a bit frustrating. But yeah, so this is these are the tests. So essentially, this is just testing the actual models package. So that's what's actually creating the records in the database. And so these are the tests that broke due to some recent change. I'm not entirely sure. As I was cleaning up the directory for this last push domain, it definitely broke something with the test. So I need to troubleshoot that a little bit more and figure out what's going on. I essentially want to make it so that it's easier to define test cases rather than just, it's very finicky with how many objects we have in the database to be able to do that piecemeal, especially as one person. So the other thing that I did this sprint was I improved the way that I was generating documentation. And so the currently, or previously I was using a GoDoc to host a local site to generate documentation for all the packages automatically. I updated that to use a different library that's actually generating Markdown. And so now I've got a much nicer formatting that's easier for the front end people to read. And in particular, I told them to utilize the handlers function or the handlers package to kind of reference what it is that they need to be expecting when they're hitting these routes. So for each function, I created a doc string that gets formatted into this, has the post request details, what fields are returned, some example response formats and failures. So for all the routes or for all of the objects that I've defined, I made a concerted effort to document this so that they're able to utilize that and give me feedback, because I think that was kind of something that was difficult to communicate on. So now that they know what the fields are, we can kind of figure out what it is they need returned, and I can create some custom routes for them to actually be able to serve them what they need. But yeah, so this was the other piece that I really spent a lot of time on this sprint, is just being able to document all of this in a cohesive manner so that they could reference that. We could start connecting things and really get this app going. So yeah, I'm pretty proud of how this turned out. But I definitely probably spent a little bit too much time this sprint optimizing or trying to optimize and trying to document things. But again, it was just kind of it was a difficult scenario given the fact that I'm just a single dev. The other two aren't familiar with the backend code and haven't really expressed any interest or desire to jump into it. And so I've just been managing what I can and creating what I can. And it's just focusing a lot on testing, and in particular was just dragging me down and making it so that I couldn't really be effective developing new methods and stuff. So again, that's why I just kind of focused on figuring out how to improve and automate my workflow, generating this documentation, making sure that I had everything documented, making sure that I had those generics so that it was easier to kind of automate data loads and test cases. And I'm hoping to just kind of clean that up and improve it for this next sprint. But obviously was not ideal for this sprint. So yeah, I still think overall I'm very proud of what I accomplished this sprint, and I think it definitely will help us moving forward. I think it'll be a lot more effective as a result. It's just not necessarily something where the gains are immediately evident, but I think they will be. Even just the 3 objects that I was able to implement this sprint, the service, office, and service offering objects in the database, was substantially quicker than previous ones. And so I'll just continue to build on that.